This is the Backlot 605 podcast, and it is now time for another interview from the Backlot. Welcome back to the Backlot 605 podcast. I'm one of your hosts. I am Casey Kelderman, and today we are here with another interview from the Backlot, as you might have heard in our intro there. But we are joined today by fellow Sioux Falls resident and filmmaker, Mr. Brian Bieber. Brian,
hello.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Glad to have you on. We are here to talk about your new documentary that you just finished, and I kind of just found out about it here in the last week or so. It is I Really Get Into It. It is a punk rock documentary. The full title, I Really Get Into It, The Underage Architects of Sioux Falls Punk.
That's
First,
right.
I love the title. I absolutely love it because when we first, in our little Backlot group chat, came across your film, many of us were like, wait, Sioux Falls has a punk rock scene?
Yeah, man. I think. Well, I mean, now there's a pretty thriving. I mean, it looks different than it did in, back in my day, I guess. But I mean, today you go to Total Drag, and there's all sorts of cool stuff happening with all kinds of young people. I'm trying not to say kids because it sounds kind of condescending, but yeah, the documentary is more is focused a little bit more on the late '80s to mid to late '90s scene in Sioux Falls that kind of sprung up with that sort of second wave of punk, where the sort of DIY ethic really took hold across the country, and so bands were coming through, and they needed places to play, and so then people like Terry Taylor, who was a promoter in Sioux Falls, took it upon themselves to put on the shows.
Yeah, and that's one thing we kind of talked in our group chat was some of the guys in our group that grew up in Sioux Falls during this time were like, well, yeah, that was sort of this big underground thing that we could go do on the weekends. And for me, I'm not in that age group, and I did not grow up in Sioux Falls. So this is all still, even though I've lived here for 5 years now, it's all still kind of foreign to me.
Sure.
But that's why I'm glad, because I've always known about it, but have never gone into it too much. And I'm glad that's something like a documentary like this is coming out to help inform people that may not have known it was here or kind of knew about it surface level. Do you think this is a movie that's going to definitely gear towards people who grew up in that or were on the outside?
Well, I think my goal, I think ultimately my primary audience, if I'm being totally honest, was my friends and the people in the scene that I came up with. I was sort of, as I was putting it together, that was my main concern: is am I doing the scene justice? But then, as it came together, there are a lot of sort of universal threads that emerged from there, and I think, I've had multiple people that have watched it who are not from Sioux Falls or we're not even, involved in any kind of independent music scene, say, I recognize myself and my friends in this movie. I think it's more of a story of people that didn't feel like they fit in anywhere, and then who found a place to, or actually who made a place for themselves to feel accepted when they didn't feel accepted anywhere else.
Yeah, and that's really a universal story. Like, even though I might not be in that scene or part of that scene, like I can definitely relate to that. And I think a lot of people could too, because I mean, especially like most people that listen to our show are movie fans. So already I think that's a little bit of an outsider mentality.
Yeah, you're kind of a weirdo. It's like everyone likes movies, but it's like if you capital L like movies, I you're a little bit of a weirdo,
Yeah.
And I actually just oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Go ahead. I was just gonna say I just rewatched Room 237, the documentary about the theories about The Shining, and I mean that's like movie fandom like to like taken to like its logical extreme, I guess, or maybe it's illogical extreme. But it's pretty. I love that documentary for one thing because I just think it's really beautifully shot. But the story is just fun and it's interestingly told and like weirdly plausible. Like I watched it again and I was like, I forgot like that this kind of makes compelling case that the moon landing footage was fake, and so there's I don't know, I don't necessarily believe that, but I just remember, or I was just shocked again by watching this, and these are these people who were obsessed with this movie. So anyway, those are movie people kind of, that's the spectrum.
I love that documentary too. I think it's one of the most fascinating movie documentaries, even though it's about the movie, but it's not about the movie. It's really about the conspiracy theories behind it. But what it does so well is it like makes, even though if I don't believe the moon landing was faked or all the other conspiracies within it, the movie presents it in a way that's not making fun of anyone who believes that and presents it like you have to double check yourself. You got to think, well, wait, maybe they're on to something here.
Yeah, because it's like, well, if he's maybe not saying that he faked the moon landing, but what is he saying about the moon landing? Like, what does all this mean? Like that is, because it seems like there's some there you can't deny some of the coincidences, I guess, in it. But so that's pretty brilliant. So I shouldn't have brought up a brilliant documentary when when I'm talking about my first attempt. But
was there certain movies that you did look at though when you were making your documentary? Was like Room 237 something you kind of looked at as like, yeah, that's a documentary I really like. How can I sort of apply the same aesthetic or documentary style to it?
That one is out of my league as far as like the aesthetics of it. I mean, that's really, really beautifully done. But there was as far as the what I was looking at, I think initially it was Instrument, the Fugazi documentary. I don't know if you've ever seen that, but it came out I think in 1998 or 9 or something. But that's a little bit more expressionistic. I think there's but it uses a lot of archival footage, and it's a I kind of looked to that to like where I liked the way some of that footage, they use kind of raw footage that didn't look great, but the way they presented it, I really like that. So, and again, it's above my pay grade in terms of like art, but it was something that I aspired to. So that was sort of where I set my sights was, if I could make something that even aped Instrument a little bit effectively, then I would have done something.
And that itself is like, looking at that raw footage itself is already really punk. So that fits the tone of the movie perfectly. Like that's, like whenever I think of punk music, it's like, no, it doesn't need to be, glamorized or anything. It's really raw and emotional that way.
It's it helps that, I don't think I'd want to see a documentary about a DIY culture that's really, really polished. And it also, I work in advertising. I work for a place called Fresh Produce in downtown. And we do a lot of video projects, and so I've worked with a lot of really talented cinematographers and videographers and editors, and you kind of get a feel for like what an aesthetic should be for a certain project. And so I knew for sure, like one of the reasons I thought it was kind of attainable is I was like, well, this has to be a little bit raw, like it has to be, it's okay for it to be a little rough around the edges. I knew that, the look of all of each, I interviewed almost 50 people and, in 8 different cities. So it was like that I knew things weren't going to look, the same. I wasn't trying to match a certain look for every interview. So it intentionally has a little bit of a patchwork feel to it because, that's also because that's sort of how we created the culture and the community that we did in those days. Was you used what you had and you made it work. So that was sort of that was what I was going for when I went into this. I was like, well, I'll use my limited experience as an editor, and I will learn how to operate a camera, a 10-year-old camera, and I'll make it work. I'll see what I can, I'll do my best with it. So
when you were trying to come up with this idea, was it something kind of you and your friends just had always been talking about, to do a documentary about the Sioux Falls punk scene, or is it just kind of came about just organically?
Yeah, so it was definitely not something that I had thought about or talked about before, but there's it's bear with me for a second because it's kind of a convoluted, but it'll come around to the thing. But there's the punk scene in Rapid City was also pretty vibrant in like the 80s and 90s, and they have this incredible website called the Rapid City Punk Rock Archive, and it's like Wikipedia, IMDb, and like Spotify for the Rapid City punk rock scene. Like there's all kinds of like interconnected resources where it tells who is in what band. It has digitized demo tapes and just like a scene history basically built into this really encyclopedic website. And I was really jealous of that when I found it, because these scenes, like ours came up in this pre-digital age, so there's no real record of this stuff on the internet, and so it's just whoever happens to have certain 7 inches or demo tapes shoved in a closet somewhere, in their parents' house or or in in a storage space in their house, and so I thought, well, it'd be great to try to do something like this for the Sioux Falls scene. So I started a website called I Really Get Into It, where I would just digitize tapes. I just kind of put a call out to friends and acquaintances and said, if you have stuff, I'll digitize it. I'll put it on this site and I'll give it back to you, so we could at least have some sort of record and try to start cataloging these things. And then as that project went on, and I would meet someone for a beer to like grab their stack of 7 inches, and we would end up talking and telling stories about the scene, talking about people that came out of it. And I really started to notice a pattern, like where I realized every person I talked to was pretty interesting, and doing cool things with their lives. And there were so many people that came out of our scene that were doing really remarkable things. And so I thought, well, maybe I'll write a book. Maybe I'll do like an oral history of the Sioux Falls punk scene, and I'll call people up and do interviews. And then, as someone who's put out a book, a few years ago in the past, then I remembered, like people don't really read books very much, and so I was like, well, I'll just make a movie, and so then I initially was gonna have my friend Walter Ports, shoot the interviews, and I would conduct the interviews, and he would do the photography for it. And then I just realized 2 guys in their 40s are not going to be able to coordinate schedules for a project like this. So I kind of I asked Walter to just be kind of consulting producer, and then I bought a camera and learned how to use it and started interviewing people. And that was about a little over 2 years ago.
Yeah. So like what it sounds like, it is a DIY thing. It is definitely,
Very
you
much.
had this idea, and it just kept steamrolling and finally coming into place. And what was the hardest part for you to put this all together? Was it doing all the interviews or the editing of narrowing it down to what to fit in the film?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of had to learn a new skill set for every step of the way, which was, so every time, including up to like this week when I was sending the zine that comes with one of the pre-order packages off to print, like where I had to learn how to add a bleed to the thing. I was like, I don't know, I've heard that before, but I don't know how to do it. But so every step of the way, there's something that was difficult, but it was so I mean, the hardest, it seems like the last thing I did was always the most difficult, because then you know how to then it doesn't, in retrospect, it never seems as hard, right? So like at first it was like, well, I don't, it was like, how do I white balance the camera? There's a lot of buttons here, and then that moved on to, like, how do you light a scene, and or how do you light a subject for an interview? And that, I had varying amounts of success with that. But yeah, it kind of, there are a lot of parallels to, like my time in the scene itself, like where I feel like I had just as much right to make a movie as I did to make music when I was a teenager, and it's sort of the same thing. Like I bought a cheap bass and taught myself how to play it, and then got together with some people who and got a little bit better at it. And we made music that way. And that's kind of the same way I did it with this, where I bought a camera and learned how to use it passively. And then, and then after that, I had a little bit of experience editing, just like short videos, but nothing on this scale. So again, it was just like another, every step of the way, it was, there's kind of another hurdle, but it was fun. I love that stuff. Like I love learning how to do new things. So
how much raw footage did you have for the movie?
Oh,
hours that you shot on for interviews.
For the interviews, I think I shot, there's I think almost 70 hours of interviews. And then the archival footage is probably closer to 100. And then there was, and then there was photos. I had to do a lot of, there's one sequence of the documentary about a dance ordinance during the early 90s that came up, like where it kind of threatened to shut down shows. And so I was going through, I was at newspapers.com, like looking up all these like old archives of Argus Leader stories about the dance ordinance, and kind of incorporating that. So there was all kinds of just, I don't know, a few terabytes worth of just raw footage. So yeah, so there's a lot. It's a little overwhelming, even like when I think about it, but
yeah, just hearing you talk about it, I can't even imagine. And then trying to get that down to a feature film length is, I don't know, that's crazy to me.
Well, there's talk kind of early on, because the thing is, you could do, I don't know, I could do 45 minutes on most of the people I talked with. And so Walter early on said, well, what if it was a web series or something, or what if you did, multiple versions? But I thought it's tough to generate interest with a web series. And I think that there's a reason to do a documentary. There's a reason why people don't just put everything out there. I think part of it is, there might be a dozen different stories to tell in all that footage, but it's finding the one that resonates with you. It's like, any kind of storytelling, you find what you think works the best for you, or you choose a direction, even if you're not sure if that's the right direction to go, and then you just follow it. And I think that's the way to be a little bit more impactful than just having a sprawling sort of thing that tires everyone out.
So next question I have is, then you get the movie finished. What was the next step? What was your idea of where am I going to put this movie out? What am I going to do with it? How am I going to get eyes onto the film that I spent so much hours on and so much of my time into?
So initially the plan was this fall. I was hoping. Well, initially the plan was this early this summer we would have a screening in Sioux Falls, and I was just going to rent out the Belbus or something, and then launch it that way, and then think about a home release maybe later in the year. But obviously that couldn't happen this year. And so I sort of thought, like, well, so that kind of bought me a little bit more editing time, I thought, because it wasn't really at a place where I liked it. So I started chopping it up again. And so those like extra months I took over the summer, I think made it a better movie. But I just kind of, the more it became clear that you know, that a screening wasn't going to be in the near future, or wasn't going to be in the cards for the near future, then I thought, well, let's do a home release. And so, and my wife, who kind of co-produced it with me, we just thought, like, well, if we get it out, in November, December, it's holiday shopping time. It's kind of it might be, a good pick me up for people. I would say it's kind of a feel good movie. And so I thought, well, yeah, it would be nice if we could put something positive out into the world right now. But yeah, so then, so we just thought, okay, we'll do the DVD. And then it became like, okay, well, what do we do for pre-order packages? And what do we do? How do we promote it? And we came up with a lot of the ideas for the pre-order packages. And then, like I said, with the zine, I said, well, would it be cool if I, made a zine to since there's no premiere screening, there's no Q&A. What if I did a zine just kind of telling the story of how it came together? And, I hadn't written the zine or designed it yet, so that was another thing that I had to do. But yeah, so we kind of brainstormed some pre-order packages, and then set the date, and then just launched. And basically the way, I got a lot of traction on, during the launch week by reaching out to a few, reaching out basically to everyone who was in the documentary and saying this thing's going to come out, or we're doing a pre-order. If you could just tell people and mention it on social media, that would be great. And so we had a few really, really good days last week where it was kind of everywhere. And, John Holt from Sioux Falls Business did a story, and that was really helpful. I am Kelloland last Friday. I don't know if I was that might not have been as helpful, but through no fault of Kello's, just because I'm not great at sound bites. But so I don't know if it helps having like a nervous guy on camera rambling. But anyway, yeah. So it was just kind of, yeah, we just sort of set a date and then said let's go, and yeah. And so far, like, knock on wood, everything's gone smoothly. The DVDs just came in today, actually, and they look good and they play. For the ones that I randomly tested play, that was my big fear. Yeah, so our home office is kind of turned into a fulfillment center where there's boxes everywhere, and so that's kind of the next step, is just all the materials are starting to come in now, and then we'll send out the pre-order packages.
So. I'm on your product page here. I'm gonna pull up, if you don't mind, one of the products that I really dig, because you have a VHS copy of the movie.
Yeah.
Where did are you a VHS fan? Is that something you always kind of gravitated towards, or?
I was someone who, when cassettes kind of came around a few years ago, I was really, I do not have my finger on the pulse of what's cool at all, because I thought, oh, really? I think that's kind of, that's kind of lame. But the more digital things get, I totally get it now. Like, where I think the analog is, and having just kind of an artifact or something physical is really nice. So I'm very into cassettes. I don't listen to them, but you have a download code, and it's much more fun I just think it's more fun to have something to hold on to it. Yeah. And there was the VHS idea just came from the fact that so much of the B-roll in the movie is VHS footage, and so that I kind of incorporated that into like the aesthetic of like some of the transitions, and even like the cards on screen, I tried to make them not quite as sharp as maybe they would be normally, so that they have a little bit of an analog feel as much as possible, or without being distracting. And so I was like, well, what if we did VHS? And then I looked around online and found a place in Brooklyn. It might be like a guy in Brooklyn who does it. But yeah, and I ordered those, and definitely the least cost-effective of all the pre-order. Like it's not cheap to make a VHS. Like you understand why DVDs and like digital versions of things are the way to go. But I'm excited about that too. Like I think that'll be fun. And so so I just decided to do a VHS version because I was the other thing too is 80s and 90s. That's what we were watching. That's where we're watching our stuff on.
Yeah, and then when I saw that, and like you said, it's something about holding it in your hand, holding the physical media in your hand, and I think for music, it's holding that record or that cassette in your hand. It feels different that way, and then I think VHS is even more so than like a DVD or a Blu-ray is the most like pure form of that.
Yeah, and it feels, I mean, not temporary, but there's a little bit of I don't know, like it doesn't feel, it feels more permanent, but it's also a little bit more fragile. Seems like, even though who knows with digital media if it'll be playable, all that stuff. But so I guess that's another kind of fun thing about it too, is just you have something that's on magnetic tape that presumably will be will live for a while. So
because in my office here I still have a VHS player and I play some
do you? Okay.
VHS tapes, and every time I pop one in I'm like, this might be the last time I ever watch this tape. There's always that fear.
Yeah, but it does. I mean, there's I don't want to make like the movie isn't like it isn't just like a nostalgia trip. I think a lot of, for the people that were involved in it, you can't help but like look back at a picture of yourself when you're 15, and not feel a little something. But that was kind of the other thought with the VHS too, is it's another way to sort of bring you back to that time, even if you're not actually watching the VHS. Just it's almost like just kind of a tactile cue to bring you back to 25 years ago.
So you said you work in advertising. Was that always something you've wanted to do, or is filmmaking something you've kind of looked towards, like this might be something else I want to pursue going forward?
Well, my degree was in creative writing, and then I worked in social services for about 10 years in different capacities. And then my bosses, Ted and Mike, kind of they recruited me based off of my Twitter feed, which used to be funny, like, back when Twitter wasn't just about, wasn't mostly upsetting, so like when it was people screwing around. And so I think their thinking was like, oh, this guy can write a funny tweet. He can write a funny headline for something. So I think, so they recruited me to work at Fresh Produce. I had never considered working in advertising before that, but I knew the Fresh people, and I thought, well, I don't want to work in advertising, but I want to work with these guys. So that's kind of how it's been since then. So and we're working there is well, I should answer your question. Like filmmaking hasn't really been. It's not like something that I ever like thought or like I don't like think of myself really as a filmmaker, and that isn't really something that I aspire to do full time. I kind of bounce around a little bit. I've written a couple screenplays, like mostly because I was kind of intrigued by the format, and I knew it'd be great to make those with. But that's not something that I'm going to do on my own. Like that's another whole, that's a whole other like creating like a narrative film is a whole other thing that I'm not equipped to do. But yeah, so it was, the documentary was just something. The more and actually, the more I was around, video work through Fresh Produce, and I started just editing little videos a lot of the time for work or just for fun. I just enjoyed sort of the process of it, and I enjoyed making things that way. And I enjoy movies and documentaries. So I thought, well, I could do this. It's like that same, it's a kind of like level of naivete that I think is beneficial if you're a creative person, where you're just like, well, that sounds cool. Let's, I'll try that. And
I can do it.
Yeah. And so, I'm not gunning to do another feature length documentary at this point. I'll tell you that. Like, I'm very happy to take a break from that, and I don't know, maybe write some short stories or something. But
so you just said you're a movie fan. What kind of movies do you like? What movies are you really into?
I do, you know, I like a lot, but I do like. I think horror movies are probably sort of the main thing. Like I like something. I like genre stuff. I love a lot of the A24 horror. Like I think The Witch is maybe one of my favorite all time movies. I like things that are a little bit unsettling. I actually just watched what was it called? You Should Have Left with Kevin Bacon. Have you seen that?
I haven't watched it yet. It just came out earlier this year, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
That was pretty unexpected. I didn't know anything about it. Again, I was kind of pleasantly surprised. It was kind of unnerving, and has anything that kind of makes me feel weird, I guess. Is what I sort of like. But yeah, I mean, I think like The Shining was probably the movie that the first movie that really kind of blew me away, and that I was absolutely terrified of it the first time I saw it. And then, a few years ago, my wife and I went and saw it at Cinemark when they did their they would do their classic movie runs, and we were both just like kind of giggling at it because it was so you see it so many times, and then we were just delighted that we were seeing it on screen for the first time. So it wasn't even it's like it's not even scary anymore. It's just enjoyable.
It's like a warm blanket.
Yeah.
Yeah, if it was last year when they did like the big like 4K release of it, I was at one of those, and that was my first time watching it on the big screen.
No, we didn't see that one. I bet that was nice.
Yeah, it was fantastic, and I had seen the movie a million times, but it was just sitting there like, oh, I can't wait to watch this scene coming up next on the big screen in this scene.
My friend Ted and his wife watch The Shining every year. The first snowfall of the year, which I think is a really fun, morbid tradition.
Yeah, when I want to say, I think when we had the first snowfall here in Sioux Falls, I posted the picture of Jack Torrance in the frozen in the snow. It's like it feels right.
It always feels like that first one.
Yeah. Horror is my genre too. I love it. It's my favorite. And so what was something? So Halloween just passed. Is there a movie you watch every Halloween? I mean, John Carpenter's Halloween is usually the go-to for everyone. Is there something else that you like to watch every Halloween?
Not really. Not anything in particular. We watch. I'm really lucky that my wife also likes horror movies, so we watch a lot of horror movies throughout the year. Anyway, but yeah, you just kind of try to make a little bit of an effort, I guess, to watch a little bit more. Just you kind of get get in the mood a little bit. But we rewatched It and It Chapter 2, like that, which I thought were like pretty great. Did you like those, the new It movies?
Yeah, I really dug the first one. The second one I didn't love as much, but I do think together are like, I haven't watched them back to back yet, and I'm interested to take 7 hours to do that.
Yeah. The second, or when it came to like when the home release of Chapter 2 came out, we watched it again, and we were pretty lukewarm about it after we saw it in the theater, and then we watched it again, and we both kind of looked at each other like, that's better than we thought, right? Like it kind of, I think it kind of grew on me a little bit, but yeah, but it's a little too long. I think 3 hours. I don't know.
Yeah,
there's that middle part where everyone's going on their own side quest that I don't know if is totally necessary, but
that was my biggest gripe with it. But I think the performances are really good, and apparently there is another cut that is supposed to be done from Andy Muschietti, who directed both. He wants to do it a big long cut between both movies and add more scenes.
Oh,
So
interesting. Okay,
yeah, I'm
I'd watch that.
interested to see what he does that with
You
that.
know,
Yeah.
I watch all that. I'll watch it,
Mhm.
any of that. Like I don't know. I'm not even like a huge. I mean, I say I'm not a huge like superhero movie fan, mostly just because I don't. I watch pretty much all of them, but I
Mhm.
don't. But I think I don't get. I don't feel as emotional about them as a lot of people I know. But like with the Justice League Snyder cut, I was like, yeah, why not? Yeah, I'll watch that.
Mhm.
You know, I I didn't like the one that was in the theater very much, so yeah, I'll watch,
It
but
can
I'll
only
watch
get
the other one.
better.
Like I don't know why. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. I'll watch 4 hours. Why not?
Yeah.
But
What's your favorite if you could only watch one movie for the
oh
rest of your
god,
life, what's that movie? I think that's an easier, maybe not an easier question than
yeah.
what's your favorite movie, but
Um, probably Airplane. I don't know. Like that's kind of. uh, I feel like that and Naked Gun are some of my earliest movie memories, and probably because my dad introduced me to those, and so I always kind of say like my dad. I learned what was funny from watching my dad. Like I would when I was a kid, I would wake up if I was having trouble sleeping. I'd go downstairs to our family or our TV room, and my dad would be watching David Letterman, and so I would didn't know what was going on, but I'd kind of like pay attention to what he was laughing at, and so that's where that introduced me to like Chris
mhm,
Elliott, and then when he showed me Airplane and Naked Gun when I was a kid, I was like, "Are you kidding me? This is the best!" I
mhm,
mean, it's the kind of thing that is it's like perfect for a 9-year old almost, and then but then it also but I watched Airplane again last year, and I'm like, this is so good. It's still so
mhm.
good. So
Yeah, God, I love those movies. Leslie Nielsen is so good in
yeah,
them, and yeah,
yeah,
it is. It's one of those movies you watch as a kid and you're like, "I shouldn't be watching this, but this is
yeah.
perfect for me." And you watch it as an adult, you're like, "I shouldn't have been watching it, but it's still perfect
It
today."
feels good. Yeah, I kind of, and that was the same with sort of the books that I read. Like I look back now, and I was reading, a lot of Stephen King. And then when I saw you guys did the Clive Barker series last month,
Mhm,
and that was sort of, I read Stephen King for quite, like when I was, I think I started, I think in like fifth grade, I read it. I was home with strep throat, and I read it, and that was uh a wild ride for for fifth grader. Like especially when you get to the end and they're in the sewer, like that's there's some pretty messed up stuff that I probably shouldn't have been reading at that age.
mhm,
But a couple years later, I discovered Clive Barker, and I was like, oh, this is like if Stephen King, is kind of like almost like maybe like a craftsman, but it was like, oh, but Clive Barker is an artist. He does these things that I would never, I could never imagine, but he just really, really masterfully. And so that was, so yeah, so I was a big Clive Barker fan for a long time, still am.
Yeah, we just finished that series. What's your favorite Barker movie?
Yeah, I think Nightbreed, like, I think Nightbreed is so weird, and, and I that's what I love about him is like the, um, one of the short stories, or I think it's in Books of Blood, but there's a story. I think it's called "In the Hills in the City," and it's about these two villages that, like every 10 years, would like everyone in the village would like can kind of contort themselves and tie themselves together with ropes, and then they would build these like giant like humanoid like versions of like the city, like where everyone was bound together, and they would work it in unison to walk around, and then they would like fight another village that did the same thing, and but then something terrible happens, and like an entire village, like one of the giants falls down and the entire village dies, and then and I just that blew my mind when I'm like an eighth grader reading that going, what in the hell is this, like it's so strange, but yeah, so
Yeah,
like
I've never heard that one, and you telling me about it, I'm like, yeah, that is strange. That's weird. That's awesome.
yeah, like yeah. I used to work with a guy who was he was a painter, and Clive Barker like collected his work, and so he was like friends with Clive Barker, and I was so starstruck. Like it's like secondhand starstruck by that.
Yeah, man. Yeah, it's like at that point, it's like, well, you want to ask, like, can I meet Clive? But then it's like,
Yeah.
I can't even muster the strength to ask that.
Yeah. How would that work?
Yeah.
One of my first interviews for the documentary was actually a woman named Kristen Conkright in Kansas City, and she is friends with she's friends with the singer of this band, Cease Under Risk, who is also, this band is from Kansas City, and they were like one of the first shows I ever went to, like one of my favorite bands when I was a teenager, and so as we were talking, and it was the first time I had met Kristen. I didn't know her before she moved, before I started going to shows, and she said, "Yeah, Steve owns the bar across the street," and she's like, "I could give him a call if you wanted to talk to him," because they played Sioux Falls all the time, and I was like, "Oh yeah, that would be great." And I like played it very cool, but I was like, "How am I gonna, like, I don't, like, I barely know what I'm doing." And it's like, I don't know if I'm emotionally prepared to meet, this guy. And luckily he was out. He was out for the afternoon, so it didn't happen. I mean, I say luckily, like it would have been great to have him in the documentary, but yeah.
So again, the documentary, I Really Get Into It. This is a brand new documentary. Where can people find it when it comes out, and where can they be able to purchase the doc?
Right now it's available for pre-order at ireallygetintoit.com. It should ship, I think, early December. Pre-order should go out. And then after that, it'll be available at Total Drag for sure. And then I think I haven't confirmed, so it might be news to these folks, but I think it'll be at Zambros and Last Stop CD Shop as well in Sioux Falls. But you can always order it at ireallygetintoit.com.
All right, perfect. And if people want to be able to follow you and your work, is that the best place to find you as well?
Yeah, or you can go to brianbieber.com. That has links to, I wrote a book of short stories a few years ago, if people are interested in that. And that's basically it. Yeah. And I Really Get Into It is on Facebook and Instagram as well. If people want information about, future screenings and things like that.
All right, perfect. So that again is Brian Bieber, the director of I Really Get Into It. Please go check it out. Follow all the links. We'll put them all in our social medias and the tags for this show. So, Brian, thank you so much for coming on the show and chatting. Yeah, chatting about the doc.
A lot of fun.
Absolutely. So again, if you want to find this show, we are on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and then pretty much anywhere you can find the podcast as well. That is where you can find us. And if you want to see this in video format, follow us on YouTube, Backlot 605. But Brian, thanks again for coming on. We'll get you again on the show at another time to talk about movies in more depth.
Yeah,
I would love to do that. That'd be awesome. All right. Yeah, absolutely. All right. Thank you guys again for listening, and we'll see you guys next time on the Backlot of South Dakota.